Advancements in the medical field are giving nurses faster, more effective results than ever before. They should expect the same from their education, too. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format allows you to set your own deadlines and leverage your experience to move faster through your program. So the faster you move, the more money you save. When you're ready, we'll be here. Visit capella.edu for a trial course at no cost to you. Capella University. Don't just learn smarter.
Hi everybody, this is the Cricket Badger podcast.
Each badger marks the track with its own scent.
His black legs are short but very powerful for digging. The name badger probably comes from the French word bêcher, meaning digger.
Hello everybody, welcome along. It's another edition of the Cricket Badger podcast. I'm James, taking you through as always. First of all, thank you very much indeed to tvsportsblog.com for their support of the Cricket Badger podcast. Give them a follow as well please on Twitter at tvsportsblog. Some brilliant sporting content on there, and their support of the Cricket Badger podcast is very much appreciated. Today though, on the Cricket Badger podcast, we're looking at the art of fielding, how you coach fielding, how you get the most out of yourself in the field as a side and as an individual. Joining me on today's Cricket Badger podcast is Patel. He's worked with the England women's team, he's worked with a number of different counties as well, and club sides around the country to encourage them to get the most out of their fielding performance. When I first started watching cricket, it was very much bat against ball, and the fielding was a peripheral aspect of cricket. Nowadays, it's part of being an all-rounder. You need to be good in the field, and often, when it comes to a choice between batsmen or a choice between two bowlers, the fielding is a major part of the selection criteria. We talked to Cookie about enthusiasm, passion, enjoying your fielding, something I never used to really do, to be honest. Before we get into the chat though with Cookie, I just want to say thank you for your votes on the hashtag GOAT commentator poll that we've been running on the @cricket_badger Twitter feed. You have voted in your thousands to see Richie Benno awarded the hashtag GOAT commentator, the voice of cricket. Jeffrey Boycott in second, David Bumble-Lloyd in third, and Michael Holding in fourth. Thank you very much indeed for keeping me entertained, at least during lockdown and beyond. And we're going to be turning our attention now on the GOAT votes to cricket grounds around the world. You've all got your favourites, you've all got your days that you remember in the sunshine, sitting at a certain ground and thinking, wow, this is the place to be. Well, over the next few weeks on the @cricket_badger Twitter feed, we're going to vote for the GOAT cricket ground. What is the greatest cricket ground to watch cricket, enjoy cricket in the world? So take a look at the @cricket_badger Twitter feed, give it a follow as well, and make sure you cast your votes on that one so you get your favourite cricket ground right through to the final stages. But let's get on with today's podcast. Cookie Patel, fielding coach extraordinaire, what it takes to be a good fielder on this edition of the Cricket Badger podcast.
It's that Badger style.
If you're anything like me, as a club cricketer, when it was batting practice, I thought, yay, that's all right. If it was bowling practice, I thought, yeah, that's good. If they said fielding practice, I thought, not so bothered about that. But I know a man who can actually take us through the art of fielding and maybe add a little bit to our various games, whatever level we're at, whether it's professional or club cricketer. And that man is Cookie Patel. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, James. How are you?
I'm not too bad at all. And you've basically made your name as a fielding coach, haven't you, in the current game? How did, I mean, first of all, let's take it right back to the start. How did you get into coaching in the first place, and what was it about cricket that led you down that path?
Well, it's an interesting one because I started coaching when I was 17. And one of the reasons I started coaching was just to give kids an opportunity to play the game that we all love and that we're all passionate about. And if you think about the chain of events for anybody playing the game at whatever level, it starts at a club. And so I just thought it just made sort of common sense to me. It just made sense to say, well, let's give kids an opportunity. Let's get into some local schools in the surrounding areas, draw kids into the cricket club, get them enjoying the game, give them a few skills, get them playing some games. And it just has a massive knock-on effect from what they do in terms of their personal development, social development, physical development, and ultimately we want them playing cricket. And in terms of their cricket development, it then draws in your family as well. Now, whether you drink or whether you socialise, whether you want to be part of the community, whether you want to be part of a club, it has massive advantages for everybody involved. So that was my sort of driver for wanting to get involved in coaching. And I started I started coaching at West Bromwich Dartmouth Cricket Club when I was 17. But my first club as an 11-year-old was Old Hill Cricket Club, and that was thanks to my school teacher, Mr. Brooks, or Alan Brooks as I call him now. And he got me involved there, and then I moved to West Bromwich Dartmouth because it was just closer for me because I lived nearby. So I got involved in coaching, coach, ended up doing a little bit for Birmingham City Council and Warwickshire County Cricket Club, working on their sort of community, I guess you'd call their community programmes now. And that was inner city Birmingham, Small Heath, Spark Brook, Spark Hill, Moseley, those types of areas. So kids that were quite passionate and predominantly a South Asian background, predominantly mad on cricket. So that was almost a win-win situation, really. So that's how I got involved in it, and then have just worked my way through the ranks, really, to a degree, with no real plan when I set out coaching to work at the levels that I have done, but just wanted to enjoy it and make sure that other people enjoyed the benefit of cricket that I've had the pleasure of enjoyment out of over all my life, really.
When you started out then, was there another career that was paying the bills, or was it always the coaching route?
Well, it's an interesting. So I started when I was 17, and then I started an apprenticeship, would you believe, as an electrician. So I was working and going to college at the same time. So I did that for a couple of years, finished my apprenticeship, qualified as an electrician, and then I had the opportunity to go to university to do a building management degree, which I didn't really want to do, if I'm honest, but it was easy. I managed to live at home. And the reason I went to Wolverhampton, as they'd say around here, Wolverhampton University, was because I could stay at home, but more importantly, I could carry on coaching, carry on playing club cricket, and it kept me involved in that. Now, I ended up also coaching at a private school in Coventry, Bablake School, while still at full-time university. So this is probably not a good message for people going to university and trying to keep down a part-time job as well. Ultimately, I dropped out of university. I completed 3 years of a 4-year course, and then I ended up coaching more or less full-time for myself, sort of 1994, 96, and it was great, and I loved it. I worked in a couple of primary schools, secondary school, private school, and then I was at that point as well, I'd started doing a little bit in the county age group pathway for Warwickshire, working with the under 10s, under 11s, and then filling in for some of the other coaches here and there. And at that point, I think I'd done my level 1 when I was 17, very quickly moved on to it used to be called Coaching Award, Senior Award, and then the Advanced. And the Advanced was a week-long residential at Lillyshaw, which was great, which is the equivalent of what do they call it now? They call it the Level 3, the Advanced course. They called it the Advanced course again. So I went through the ranks very, very quickly. And then in 96, I got the job at Warwickshire County Cricket Club as a cricket development officer, where I worked for 4 years and managed to work with up to the Warwickshire under 19s, which was just threw a different light onto coaching, because all of a sudden it wasn't so much about mass participation and getting loads of kids involved. It was about potentially preparing cricketers for first class cricket, or second 11 cricket, and then first class cricket. So, and 2-day cricket, which was very new to me. And I never played professional cricket. So it's always been a learning curve, and it still is a learning curve. To continually stay ahead of the curve, if you like. So that was interesting.
What we're saying so far is that you can basically fit a plug and do a little bit of electric. So you can build about 3/4 of a house, but you know how to coach cricket. That's basically what you've said so far. Well,
I think, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, do you? But I think I knew where my passion lay, and I knew what I wanted to do. And this is, and I don't share this very often. I suppose loads of people will hear this now, but I can remember being at primary school, and sometimes when a school teacher says, well, right, what does everybody want to do when they grow up? And people say, I want to be a policeman, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a doctor. And I can remember, and it was Mrs. Humphreys, I remember my school teacher, and she said to me, what do you want to be? And I said, I want to be a trainer. And she said, what, like a train driver? And I said, no, like training people in sport. So I can remember from a very early age that, and I don't know where that come from. I really don't know where that come from. But I can vividly remember saying that to her and saying I wanted to be a trainer. So I assume I meant coach, and that's what I ended up doing.
It's interesting that, isn't it? Because, if somebody had asked me the same question, I'd have said I'd want to be a professional cricketer. Didn't quite do it, but I've kind of lived my life around the edges of cricket, really. A friend of mine at school basically would have said he wanted to be a stock car racer. And we had a conversation actually quite recently that we talked about it and said there's not many people that when they sit in a classroom and they say what they want to do when they grow up kind of question, they actually get to do it. So there's three of us now that can tick it off. You've actually achieved what you wanted to do.
Well, yeah, and it's been fantastic, and the journey hopefully continues. And I've been very fortunate. I've met some great people, some fantastic players across the pathway, and I've been fortunate enough to work with Northants, Derby, and with the England women and within the women's pathway for a substantial amount of years. And it's been great. It's been really great, and it is something that I would recommend to anybody that has a passion not only for the game but developing people and improving people's skills in the game that we love. And I think if you throw those three things into the mix, then it's definitely worth doing for whichever level you want to work at. Now, I can say that more freely, I think, because I have worked at, like I say, across the entire pathway. And the satisfaction levels are no different whether you're working with little Johnny, little Sarah at sort of, under 10s, or whether you're working with a professional or an international cricketer. The whole element around keeping it fun and making it moving people forward is the key to coaching for me. And we could have a massive philosophical debate around what is coaching. My take on it would be about it's moving somebody along their journey, or helping them move along their journey from A to B to C to D and keep moving if that's what they wish to do. Now, that journey will look different for a 10-year-old as it would do for a professional cricketer. Nevertheless, it's about how can we act as facilitators, as coaches, to help them move along that journey. So for a 10-year-old, it might be just getting your hands together and being able to catch a ball or to be able to strike a ball. And for a professional cricketer, it might be about making decisions because they can already strike a ball. The principle's exactly the same. The topic that you're talking about, the context, might be a little bit different. So it's interesting. However, that puts you in a position where you have to think, what is it that these players are going to need? And if we can understand those needs of those players, then it allows us to operate more effectively as coaches.
How important is enthusiasm to all of this and passion? You mentioned the word passion there. I mean, I was lucky enough to work quite closely with Yorkshire at one stage, and I saw Paul Farbrace doing fielding drills. And I don't think I've ever met a coach who is more in love with cricket than Paul Farbrace, and he communicated that beautifully to the players. They absolutely loved doing coaching drills with him because he was just so enthusiastic about it and he wanted them to do well. It becomes quite a big thing of it, doesn't it? If you get to a certain level where you're coaching, if you're enthusiastic and passionate, it transmits it better.
Well, I absolutely. And I think there's a number of benefits to that. One is if you're enthusiastic about it, then there's more chance of you enjoying what goes on and what happens in that particular sessions or however many sessions you run. I think that then rubs off on players because they can see that. They turn up and they think, this lad's bouncing off the walls here. This is just going to be a fun session. And I think that word fun shouldn't never, ever be estimated at whatever level you're operating at. I think if you keep it fun, if you manage the competitive levels as well, depending on the group and the environment that you're working in, I think those two things are just fantastic. And then you throw in a little bit of, right, we're going to help you with your development of your skill development or how you're going to play the game technically or tactically or whatever it may be. It's just the right formula. So I think that passion for me and that enthusiasm has got to be the driver. And then it's about how knowledgeable you can become about your area that you talk about. So for me, in and around fielding, that enthusiasm and passion has always been 110%. My knowledge when I first started out in fielding would not have been 100%. The desire to have that knowledge would have been 100%, and it still is. And so I'll give you an extreme example of that is I did my master's degree in coaching science, but I did it specifically around diving and understanding what it takes to make a fielder, or the components, if you like, of what makes a safe and effective dive. If I've got that knowledge and it's been researched and it's watertight, I have the confidence and the skills then to be able to take that to a player to say, look, in order to first and foremost make sure you do it safely, these are the things that you need to consider. And then B, it's about, well, actually, a ball that you may not have dived for is now a ball that you're saving. Yeah. And that then becomes a game changer for players. And that ultimately, what fielding is all about at that top end is about, it actually wins your games of cricket. And dare I say it, it will also lose your games of cricket.
The Cricket Badger podcast is brought to you in association with tvsportsblog.com. Excellent sporting content. It's well worth a look. and give them a follow on Twitter at TV Sports Blog. When you did your levels and your qualifications and you went through and, as you say, you got to the top end of that, at what stage did you actually think, because when you started out doing the coaching, you'd have done batting, bowling, you did know every discipline. When was it that you transferred your efforts more to the fielding side, and what made you do that?
Well, it's interesting. I was quite fortunate when I worked for ECB. When I finished working as cricket development officer in Shropshire, I had the opportunity to go and do some work, some project work for ECB. As a bit of a reward, I suppose, or part of the bartering process there was they said, well, is there anything that you'd like to do? And I said, well, I'm really interested in fielding, because that fielding came from me being I don't want to say I was a good fielder, I'd never say that, but I was a reasonably good fielder and I'd throw myself about, and that kept me in the side when I played Birmingham League cricket. I was probably a better fielder than I was a batter or a bowler. So that's where that originated from. So they said, well, what do you want to do with that? And I said, well, I'd just be interested to know what the movement patterns are of a fielder and what makes them a good fielder. So I got the opportunity to work with Stuart Barnes at Gloucestershire Academy and the second 11 there, and started doing that. And then Mark Elaine, who was the head coach at the time, drafted me into the first 11. So I went from knowing nothing about fielding in essence to being in a first class environment where all of a sudden it was, right, what can you do that's going to add value here? So at that point then that's where I had to get ahead of the curve, and that's, I suppose, if there was ever a time to panic, that would have been it, in terms of an environment here with some very, very good professional cricketers. And the other beauty that was at Gloucestershire for me was that Chris Taylor was there, who was probably regarded as one of the best fielders on the county circuit, and he was great. He's been fantastic, and ever since that time, we've gotten really well. And obviously, he had the role as England lead fielding coach, and he's been instrumental in part of my development as well. So that's where all that fielding came from. So I had the opportunity then to look at that research, and then Mark Elaine offered me a part-time deal which worked perfectly with my ECB role in 2007, and we were just about to start the season, and I think unfortunately Mark parted company with Gloucestershire. So I was chomping at the bit thinking, I can do something here, I can do something. So I rang around a few counties and had a bit of a knockback and all the rest of it. And then I went and met David Capel at Northants, and he was really interested. And I met with him in his conservatory, and I then had 5 years with Northants on the back of that, which was great. Learned an awful lot, not only more about cricket and the way that you play the game, but also what it takes to interact with players, how you deal with players, and the dynamics of a dressing room. And it was great because my first year at Northampton, it was like walking into an international dressing room. And when you had the likes of Monty Panesar, Johan Lowe, Lance Klusner, Andrew Hall, Nicky Boyer, Johan van der Vaar, and then you had the greats of David Sales, Stephen Peters, Niall O'Brien, the keeper, Jason Brown was still there at the time when I started. So all of a sudden, it was like going into a dressing room full of superstars. And for me, I thought, do you know what? I need to make sure here I've got all my ducks lined up, because if I don't, these people are very experienced and knowledgeable. Will find you out very quickly if you're going to add value to their game or not.
That's not a phrase you hear very often on the podcast. You want to get all your ducks lined up in a row.
So yeah, it was a massive learning curve for me. One that I thoroughly enjoyed, and the challenge of that as well. And thanks to Kate really for giving me the opportunity, as did Mark Elaine and Stuart at Gloucestershire.
And I mean, on my slightly tongue-in-cheek introduction, I think there are a lot of people out there who like batting, like bowling, but find fielding a chore, whether they're good at it or not. I had Jack Russell on the podcast recently, and he said the reason he became a wicketkeeper was because he didn't want to field at third man and fine leg all day long. You hear stories of people dozing off in the field and finding it a bit tedious, particularly in red ball cricket. Do you find that at all levels that, whether it's kids or whether it's professionals, that there can be a resistance to actually wanting to field?
Yeah, well, I think I'll say two things here. The first thing is fielding is very exciting, and it's very exciting with what's happening with fielding now, and there's a lot more awareness around what we need to do with fielding. That would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is I don't think, and I'll be happily shot down here if needs be, I don't think as a nation we do what we should be doing with fielding that we need to. I think it's starting to happen, and there are some really, really good examples of where that's starting to work well, but I still think there are counties And I think it's more down to a lack of understanding and knowledge and comfort and confidence to be able to work with fielding and fielders. But I don't think we're there yet. I think we're still a little bit behind the curve, speaking nationally. Like I say, I think we are moving forward with that, and I think that's great, but I think there still needs to be a larger emphasis on what we do with fielding. Now, I contradict myself here a little bit. You see these fantastic catches and run-outs and all the rest of it on TV, which suggests things are starting to begin to happen. And you see that at the international level, and that's because those guys practice day in, day out. And they are starting to do that, those sort of sexy things, if you like, in terms of, diving on the boundary and flicking it back and your partner catches it and that sort of thing. I think those things are changing. I think being a complete purist around fielding, I would like to see more of that happening in counties, in clubs, potentially in schools as well. And I think when I go around and I deliver my fielding workshop to coaches, it's interesting, and that's both sort of experienced coaches that have been in the game a long time. It's interesting to see the lack of confidence and knowledge around fielding, what people think in terms of how they should go about their coaching with fielding. So I think there is a little bit of a gap there that needs to be filled very, very quickly. Now, I think it will be filled more by default rather than us driving it forward the way that we need to.
Take you back into that Northants dressing room, your first day in there, and you've already kind of listed the roll of honour of people that are sitting around there. Just on my knowledge of those cricketers, there's quite a big difference in how they fielded. Monty's not known for his fielding. David Sales isn't necessarily built for speed. Some of the others were more kind of terrier-like. I guess you have to look at a squad, you have to think about who they are, where they might field, and tailor your sessions to each one, do you?
Well, yeah, I'm just going to pick you up there on David Sales. Now, here's an interesting one, and I'll answer your question in a minute, but this is interesting. 5 years at Northants, I reckon I did 99% of all white ball games, and I record every bit of fielding that happens in that white ball cricket. So then it would have been T20, 40 over and 50 over. So there were the three formats when we first started. And statistically, I could tell you categorically which fielder was top and which fielder was nearer the bottom. And if I had to put my mortgage on any fielder in that dressing room, it would be David Sales, which you might find interesting. I mean, because you say...
People talk about David Sales, and he was a terrific player. Batting wise, he was as good as most people on the county circuit. And the thing that kind of the second line you always hear when people talk about David Sales is, he never played for England because, and it was along the lines of what I said. And you're maybe going against that there, aren't you?
Well, yeah, I suppose there's probably a little bit of perception there when you look at somebody and you think, But then you look at Ian Botham in his latter days, and he took some of the best catches you'd probably ever see. And he probably wasn't, he's not somebody that you'd necessarily call that looked like an athlete. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't move. Now, I think if you have the right technique and the right attitude and the right focus, I think, I'm not going to say regardless of your physique, it still allows you to perform to a level. Now, having the right physique will naturally enhance your ability to be more effective. I have no doubt about that. And I do think that if somebody like David Sales and they were more athletic, they'd probably be, I have no doubt, even better than what they were or than what he was. It's interesting, but when you look at, going back to your question about where fielders field, then Jumble would field either in the inner circle and then predominantly he'd field on the boundary because of his ability to throw the ball really well. So we did start to find, we did find that at some point you do start putting fielders in specific places. So Alex Wakely, for example, would predominantly field on the boundary at deep mid-on and would do mid-on to mid-on in T20 cricket and would run the length of the field at the end of every over because that suited him and that suited the team and his abilities to do what he needed to do in that position. That was very, very specific.
And equally, do you find places to hide people too?
Well, see, now that's an interesting one because I think in the modern day game now, that thing of hiding fielders is non-existent. And the reason I say that is now that you mentioned about Jack Russell there saying that he didn't want to go to third man to fine leg, etc. I think those positions now are just as important as being at backward point or being at mid-wicket or being at cover.
There are places, though, where you can do least damage, aren't there?
Well, potentially. I mean, this is where you start getting really detailed and you start looking at all the data of a potential game and say, right, a particular batsman won't hit it there. If we've got a weaker fielder, let's stick him over there. I think that does happen. I think that's getting less and less, though, because I think people now are more athletic. They are practicing more, not as much as I would like in terms of fielding. And I think they are becoming aware now that actually, do you know what? When it comes to selection, you need to be a fielder first and foremost, and then you need to be a batter or a bowler. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. And if you think about a T20 game of cricket, 120 balls, it's very rare that anybody bats 120 balls. It's very rare that anybody will ever bowl 120. But the one thing you will do, you will definitely field 120. And I did have this conversation, and I certainly shan't mention the players, but I did have a phone call when Chris Taylor was the lead fielding coach about a player, and they wanted to know whether, in my opinion, he was a better fielder than another fielder at a different county, both bowlers. Which one should we go for? And it was interesting that they'd got to that point where it came down to the fielding, not their ability to bowl, but their ability to field. So for me, it tells me that fielding should be much, much higher up on the agenda than we probably think it, or probably where it is at the moment.
Fed up of collecting your team's matchday subs? Worried about carrying cash post-COVID-19? Try slateapp.co.uk. Less contact than contactless. Slate, the smartest way to collect weekly match fees and more. Download the app, slateapp.co.uk. Not just for cricket, any clubs that collect subs. It just makes sense. Stick it on the Slate. slateapp.co.uk. Let me take you back a step and then we'll go into the modern day fielding side of things. As somebody that hasn't played professional cricket, did you ever get any resistance from a professional player in a dressing room to say, you've not been here and done this, so what are you telling me about?
Yeah, nobody ever categorically said that to me. I think it probably might have been more my perception around, do you know what, I just get the sense here that that professional cricketers are great people. They will talk to you, they will spend time with you, they're great people to be around, and I've been very fortunate for that. But sometimes when it comes to do you know what, this is my livelihood, you've got to give me the right information here to make me a better player and secure the longevity of my career. That's what they're interested in, and ultimately that then allows them to win games. So definitely felt that. And there's one particular player at Northampton who was as polite as anybody, but would never ever talk to me, and I found him really difficult to engage with until about halfway through the season. And then he just opened up, and he was absolutely brilliant with what he had. But I think he was just sounding me out and wanted to know that I wasn't just somebody that was just making it up and along for the ride, and would and could be able to add value. And once that happened, that was great. I think that also then comes down to the ability to be able to build trustworthy relationships with players to say, look, this is what we can do. And I think the beauty with fielding is going back to the bit about what coaching is and moving along their journey, is that if you can prove to them that this is where you were at the beginning of the season or the beginning of the winter, let's say, in a training phase, here we are in November and here we are in April. Look how much you've proved. And if you can prove that by statistics or video footage or their own feel or their own admission to it, then all of a sudden they think you're the best thing since sliced bread. And that's for any coach, really. And that's ultimately what you want. Now, it's not about egos or anything like that. It's about helping them move forward with what they're trying to do. So I think that, you've got to have that combination of being able to build a relationship, be trustworthy, be honest, and then be able to have the technical information around, right, what is it that you're going to have to do to be able to help them move forward with their game technically, that they can then apply, and then they can apply a game situation that's going to allow them to win a game of cricket.
Let's compare areas. I mean, I started watching cricket full on in the 80s. And you've already mentioned both of them, but there was Fat Gat, there was Alan Lamb, there was quite a few people that didn't necessarily look like supreme physical specimens. All of them fantastic cricketers, don't get me wrong. But the levels of fitness have gone through the roof, haven't they, in the last 30 years or so. And so people are far more athletic looking that play cricket, generally speaking. And I think when I look at white ball cricket these days, and I've heard other people say the same thing, you look at true all-rounders as having three disciplines, batting, bowling and fielding, and fielding's often talked about in the same breath. I was going to say almost in the same breath because it is maybe just a little bit behind, which is probably where you'll come in from. But you look at some of the games that we see these days and everybody will say the level of fielding in T20 cricket, T20 cricket, white ball cricket has brought the level of fielding through the roof. And Ben Stokes' catch against South Africa in the World Cup Ben Stokes' catch off Stuart Broad in the Ashes. Examples of incredible fielding get replayed and replayed and replayed. So I think there is certainly an acceptance that fielding is massively important, but you'll say that maybe it could be even more so.
Yeah. I think it could. I think it is going through. And if you were to look at the curve or a graph of how fielding has improved in the last 10 years, the curve would be very, very steep. I just think we've now got to get onto that curve and make sure that it continues to grow. And I think we need to almost transfer that through international cricket, first-class cricket, second 11 cricket, academy cricket, club cricket, and let it run all the way through the system so it threads all the way through. So it's almost, part and parcel of what you do day in, day out, and it becomes more and more routine. And don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying it's not good. It is good. I just think it could be a lot better. And it's interesting, when you have now there are some counties that do have specialist fielding coaches come in, and it adds a different layer and a different perspective onto something and a different voice. All of a sudden the focus is quite sharp, whereas if you've got your everyday coaches doing it, it almost sometimes it's the easiest thing to say, we won't do that if there's time constraints or whatever else, if there's any other pressures. It's the easiest thing not to do. And I just think if you've got a specialist that is doing that for you, they can drive that because that's all they're focused on. And I suppose I get that sort of drive and that passion and that I don't know what the word is, but to make sure that it's at the forefront. When I worked at Derbyshire under Graham Welsh, and we had a great set of staff there in terms of everybody led on a specific area. Now, Graham was a great leader, and he says, look, you're responsible for fielding. I will hold you accountable for fielders improving. And that was great. So for me, my focus wasn't on the batters or the bowlers or anybody else or anything else. It was about making sure that these fielders were as good as they possibly could be. And that's what he held me accountable for. So I drove that as much as I could. So you then fall back on your relationships and your opportunities to say, right, come on, have half an hour. Let's just work on this particular throw. So, we take Wayne Madsen and we go, right, backward point, mate. That's where you're a specialist. Let's just have half an hour. You throwing the stumps down here. I think it is changing. The tide is definitely changing. I just think we need to just keep driving it forward. And what I would love to see happen is for us to get 100, 1,000 coaches that become fielding experts that can drive with great enthusiasm, passion, knowledge, and get that into players at whatever level they work at. Because I think it will drive the standard of cricket even more in this country. And ultimately, we become consistent world champions forevermore. So I suppose you can tell by the tone of my voice, it's something I just think we can just be bigger and bigger and better at if we can drive it even more. And I think, the ECP are making great strides in that. I've been fortunate enough to work in their coach education development department. I've been lucky enough to work with Chris Taylor and Mark Hoppo, who's now the lead fielding coach. They are making strides, but it's at the very top end of the game. And I know that filters down into the first-class game, but I just think we need to, completely across the spectrum and become world leaders, and it'd be great. It'd just be great.
I'm going to ask you the same question, but from two different aspects. I'm going to go with the 17-year-old first. There's a young lad who's listening to this who turns upon at the weekend, is an okay fielder, contributes, but doesn't necessarily totally enjoy it. What kind of advice, maybe sort of 3 or 4 points, would you give him to maybe focus on to get more out of fielding and contribute more in the field?
I've got a bit of a mantra which I always use with fielding. After 11 years of coaching fielding, I've come up with a mantra of mentally and physically prepared. So if you think about being mentally prepared, what does that actually mean? Now, there's a multitude of things there. So everything from attitude to the way that you turn up. So if you turn up for your fielding practice and you're thinking, I don't really want to do this, but I'll get my 10 catches done, then that's not going to work for you. If you turn up and go, I'm going to nail these 10 catches, or I'm going to really work on the one thing that the coach has been telling me to work on and getting my hands ready or making sure that I get to the ball quickly, whatever it may be, then all of a sudden that attitude, that mental preparation changes the way that you perform. Right through to a game situation where being mentally prepared, you're at backward point or whichever fielding position you're at, you could be going, right, I'm switched on, the bowl's at the top of his mark, I can see where this batter's playing the game, I I can see that he likes to drop it and run. I'm going to watch the way that his bat path comes down, whether he accelerates or whether he decelerates. So if he decelerates, he's killing the ball, he's dropping the ball, which tells me that I'm going to have to dart in and get the ball. If he tells me he's going to have a quick slash of the ball, then I know that the ball's going to come quickly, so I need to be still and ready. So that's just mental preparation. And then the physical preparation is am I in the right position? Am I switched on? Am I getting into a good position that's going to allow me to attack the ball and get into that, what I would call, if we were to have a fight now, what sort of position would you get into? You'd get into a side on ready to hit me, wouldn't you?
No, Cookie, you don't know me well enough. I'd be running away from you.
Well, but likewise, if I said to you, right, I'm going to smash a ball at you, you wouldn't just stay as you are, would you? You'd get into a crouch position and all of a sudden you're physically set, aren't you? So likewise, whether you're at third man or whether you're at backward point, you're going to get into your fighting fielding position, ready to attack the ball or ready to create an opportunity that's going to potentially change the direction of the game and ultimately win you the game of cricket. So my advice to that 17-year-old is, right, where are you starting? And is your mental state where you need it to be before we do anything physical? So there needs to be an inner drive from that individual to say, do you know what, I want to get better. Now, if there is, great. If there isn't, then that might be a little bit of coaching that needs to happen to say, well, what is it that drives you? What is it that's going to make you get to where you want to? And that will all depend upon his motives or her motives in terms of how successful they want to be at whatever level they're playing at.
One of the things that I often, I can relate it to myself playing cricket when I was younger, but you tend to do the things you enjoy doing, don't you? If you're batting and you like to face certain types of bowlers, that makes you happy because you can get a few off the middle. If you're fielding, like you say, just lob me up 10 catches, I'll catch those. Oh, that's my fielding drill done. It's the stuff that you find hard in matches that you don't necessarily practice because it's harder because you don't always do it right. And you want to do things right in your practice, don't you? And make it easy for yourself. But by tackling the harder things, you actually get better, don't you?
So I'll give you a perfect example. So how many times have you gone to nets and had, you've either been in the net or you've had an open net where you're lucky enough to get on the edge of the square, perhaps on the ground, and the coach has gone, right, we'll have a scenario, it's the last 3 overs of the T20, you're chasing 28 off the last 3 overs. Yeah. And the bowler's obviously got to bowl at the death, the batters have got to get 28 runs off the 3 overs. Great scenario. And you'll do that, which is great. But then you'll go, right fielders, we've got to make sure he doesn't get these 28 runs. How are we going to do that? How are we going to influence that? How are we going to tactically potentially change the way that where we are in the field? What might we do differently? What signals are we going to look from the bowler? So all of a sudden, you've got fielders engaged in playing a game of chess with a batter. And then individually, you've got to then say to the fielders, right, what do you think? Where do you think this batter's going to hit it? How do you think he's going to hit it? Do you really need to come in off the rope and think, well, if he's trying to clear the rope, you don't want to be walking in. You want to be stood on the rope as much as you possibly can.
That was my bugbear. I was captain of a local team, and I used to put people back on the ropes, and then the batsman would hit the ball away. It would, if they'd stayed on the ropes, so they caught it, but they've walked in 20 yards, it goes over the head. I used to drive me mad. Sorry, I interrupted because you just brought back a bad memory there.
Yeah, and you've seen that happen lots of times. So I think, that then comes down to the skill of the coach to go, do you know what? The type of practices that we will have will be all-encompassing. And, you're not going to do everything in one night. However, if you create and set up your practices appropriately that meet the needs of the players, that meet the needs of the demands of the game, then all of a sudden you get players engaged. Players want to be part of that success, and then all of a sudden they want to start contributing, and then all of a sudden their attitude is, well, actually, do you know what? I might not have scored many runs today, but I might still win the game for the team here if I can do this right. And I suppose it's just changing that attitude, certainly at club level. I've just started working at a local club, and they've brought me in just purely to work on the field, and it's amazing the response that I've had from the players where they've gone, we've never ever had this, and I've got to admit I've gone quite hard at them because that's a bit of the way that I operate at times, but it's interesting. The feedback has been fantastic, and they've just said, we absolutely love this. We haven't talked about batting and bowling because I very rarely do these days, but in terms of the fielding, it's like, man, if you get this right, this is what you can do, this is how you can win games of cricket. So there's I've almost turned up their energy levels from a 3 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10 with a few sessions and a few simple changes in the way that they think and approach the way they do their fielding through fun, engagement, thinking about what they do and the types of practices we run. And it's been I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and the lads have as well.
I was going to ask you, Cookie, about the 17-year-old, and then I was going to ask you the same question about maybe a 33-year-old professional cricketer. But from what you've said and what you've said in the rest of the podcast, the advice would be very, very similar, wouldn't it?
I don't think it. Yeah, it would. I don't think it's any different. Obviously, you'd have to tweak one or two things. It's interesting because when I work with Northants, obviously men, professional cricketers, I was also working with England women at the time as well. And when I started with England women, I thought, should I be hitting the ball as hard at them, or should I ease off a little bit or not? No, it's regardless of age, to a degree, regardless of gender, regardless of ability, you treat them as cricketers and you treat them as wanting them to, become better fielders, full stop. If you've got a 10-year-old, obviously you're not going to make it as hard as you would do for a professional cricketer, but you've just got to differentiate, I guess. The principle of what you're trying to do is exactly the same. And I think, again, going back to what you said earlier, that enthusiasm, your poor father race enthusiasm, needs to be there constantly to get them to want to do it as much as they can and to the best of their ability.
I can't remember what year it was we were in Abu Dhabi, but you were obviously working with Derbyshire at the time. I was doing a bit of work around the club. We had a very good afternoon, didn't we, where I beat you at go-karting.
Hang on a second.
You're going to come back.
I think you beat me on the first round. I think it was a draw. I think
I had a very dodgy car on the second one.
No, it was a good afternoon.
It was. I'll tell you what, though, it was hot, wasn't it?
It was hot. It was very hot. Having a helmet on.
It was whatever the temperature was in Abu Dhabi with all the overalls and the helmet on, and I think I probably lost about 3 stone, which was probably much needed.
Yeah.
But anyway, and when we were talking in Abu Dhabi, and you were obviously drowning your sorrows after your defeat, we were talking about coaching, weren't we, as we walked around a shopping mall, I think, and you were talking about maybe doing a book on all of this and wrapping it up into a book as a bit of a guide to how people could interpret that. Is that still on the horizon?
Well, it's been on the horizon for a very long time. However, I have started to put pen to paper at long last. And every time I sort of sit down to put something together, I think, well, who's ever going to want to read a book by you? But then when I speak to coaches, they say, we'd love to know about fielding. So there's a part of me that, I've started to put down my thoughts and whatever else. And I'm hoping, I won't put a timescale on it because it might not happen, but the desire for it to happen is there. I am certainly looking at putting a book together that will talk about coaching and predominantly around fielding coaching and what it takes to coach fielding, with a pure purpose of helping coaches build their confidence levels and their knowledge around fielding and what it is they need to do to help players at whatever level they work at. Because I think that would be, I just think it would be a really good resource if nothing else. I've got to admit, if there was a book out there purely on fielding that would help, then I'd certainly be looking to have a look at it. So I think it's something that I would definitely like to do, definitely like to share my experiences. And if it helps anybody in terms of their coaching or even players, then it's a win-win situation. So at some point, I certainly I'd like to think I'll get something down and something published, hopefully.
Well, in about 10 years' time, when you finally bring it out, I'll publicise it on the Cricket Badger podcast for you.
It'd be absolutely fantastic if you did that for me, James. That would be much appreciated.
You mentioned working with a local club there. Are you available for hire if anybody out there wanted to have Cookie Patel to come along for a couple of sessions?
Yeah. Well, I'm in an interesting position because I've recently been made redundant from ECB. And I am now in a point where I've taken a few weeks off. I thought I'll have a few weeks off. I'll go and do a bit of volunteering work with the Shropshire, Staffordshire and Cheshire Blood Bikes, which is what I do. And I thought I'll go and do a little bit of kayaking because I love that. And then when I finished with ECB the following week, they put everybody on lockdown. So I've been confined to the house and the garden and a little bit of cycling. But in terms of employment, I was looking now to go self-employed and start looking at, offering fielding coaching, fielding workshops for coaches. And I mean, it's interesting. And I was advised once by Trevor Penny never to be called a fielding specialist because they says nobody will ask you to do any batting and bowling coaching, and I should have listened to him. And nobody really does nowadays, even though I'm an ECB level 4 coach. So I'm absolutely available. If anybody wants to look me up, then fieldingcoaching.com on the website, and you'll find me. It'd be great to do some fielding work for people that want to be involved with it.
It's been great to catch up with you, mate, and we'll have to do another karting. It's if it's 1-1, we'll have to do a decider.
Absolutely. Yeah, somewhere a bit cooler, perhaps.
Well, it's been great to have you on the Cricket Badger podcast. Cookie Patel, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, James. Thanks a lot. Take care.
It's that Badger style.
Thank you very much indeed to Cookie Patel for joining me on this edition of the Cricket Badger podcast. I think you'll agree. Interesting chat, that one, because I think fielding sometimes goes under people's radar when it comes to coaching and how to get the best out of your cricket, whatever standard it's at. So hopefully you've taken something from what Cookie has to say. We'll get him back on again in the future because there's a number of different questions I've thought of since then that I could ask him. Thanks to tvsportsblog.com for their support of the Cricket Badger podcast. Give them a follow on Twitter at tvsportsblog. Follow at cricket_badger. Look out for those hashtag GOAT cricket ground votes as we go through the next few weeks. And if you can, if you've got a little bit of time, please like, subscribe and leave a nice comment on the Cricket Badger podcast. That would be very much appreciated. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you next time on the Cricket Badger podcast.
I'm enrolling in Medicare soon, and it had me a little confused. Then I found myhealthpolicy.com. With myhealthpolicy.com, I could go online and compare Medicare Advantage plans from some top-rated national insurers, including $0 monthly premium plans. I can learn about plans in my area and talk with a licensed insurance agent if needed. myhealthpolicy.com has made doing my research a whole lot easier.
My choice, my Medicare, myhealthpolicy.com.